Some people say we should elevate the G2, the US and China. They should really provide leadership and then gain support from the G7 or G9 after they kind of work out a plan. Some people say we need the IMF to do a better job with early warning systems. We need to have the IMF do a better job identifying global imbalances, and we need to give the IMF real teeth so that it can demand corrective action when there are imbalances. Well, let me give you a few thoughts on this. I spent part of my life, part of my career, working on G7 issues at the White House. I also spent a number of years at the International Monetary Fund working on global oversight and issues, including building some early warning system indicators. And let me tell you that I don't think that this problem is really going to be solved by changes in regulatory bodies and reports and all that. They all have merits, but the end result is I don't think that they are just going to work the way we say. In 2002 to 2008, the world economy became terribly unbalanced, especially in my country. The US had a negative household saving rate. We had a current account deficit of 6 to 7% of GDP. We knew this was not sustainable. China had a saving rate of 40%. It had a current account surplus of 10% of GDP. 40% of all Chinese GDP was basically the building of a new factory, of new factories. This was not sustainable either, and we should have known it. We also should have known the financial sector was totally out of whack. Historically, on the New York Stock Exchange, the financial sector is responsible for 15 to 20% of total profits. Do you know what that ratio was in 2007? It was like 42% of total profits. Clearly, this was not sustainable also. I think that the folks who say that the answer to the problem is a new G or a new early warning system or new regulatory bodies, they're missing the point. We should have known something was wrong. I think what's been missing, is global economic and political leadership. We Americans like baseball. I'll give you a baseball analogy. I think we took our eye off the ball. And my main recommendation is that we need to go back to basics. Back in 1975, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing invited the leaders of 5 other countries to Rambouillet for the first meeting of what became the G6, and then the following year, the G7, when Canada joined the group. The purpose of this meeting was to focus on the global macroeconomy and global macroeconomic risks. The world had suffered the high oil prices in 1973, the oil shock. We were in a global recession in 74, 75. And the emphasis was on what do we need to do to get the world economy going. In those early years, staff played a relatively small role in these G7 summits. There was more emphasis on content than on communiques. There was less emphasis on appearances of doing something. In my opinion, we've lost our way on global leadership. Now, some of this happened on my watch in the Clinton administration, and I take some responsibility for this. Basically, President Clinton shifted G7 summits to topics that interested him: fighting AIDS in Africa, promoting educational opportunities for girls in developing countries, fighting global poverty, promoting the use of computers and technology in developing countries. These were all laudable goals, but they meant that global leaders were focusing on these ancillary goals and not on the core macroeconomic problems of the day. Under George W. Bush, the focus shifted to terrorism, to relations with Islamic world, and so on. Still, maybe important goals, but this was time and attention that was taken off of the core macroeconomic matters and put on these other topics. My recommendation is that we need to get a small, focused set of countries together for heart-to-heart talks of leaders about core macroeconomic and financial issues. We need to take the G7 back to the 1970s. To me, we do need to have the leaders of the top 7 or 10 countries in the world get together. They need to get to know each other. We probably need India and China in the group. My neighbors to the north probably wouldn't like it, but we may need to have some trimming of the smallest member of the G7 just to make room for some of the bigger countries that are systemically more important. What I would do, the process of the G7 is fine. Getting the finance ministers together on a regular basis, the deputies, getting the G7 leaders together. But I think we need to have more, again, emphasis on these core macro questions. Right now, we need the leaders of Germany, of France, of Italy, for example, to put pressure on the US to continue to increase its national saving, to rebalance its consumption. That might mean that the US would not recover quite as fast, and you might not have as quick rebound of your exports, but it still is that's what leadership is all about. We probably need the leaders of France, Germany, and Italy, again, to be putting pressure on China, to be telling China, look, you've got this focus on, you've always had a focus on export-led growth. You need to really be seriously rethinking this, and you need to be putting more emphasis on domestic demand. Again, this won't be popular with the Chinese leadership, and it might actually lead to a loss of export potential in the first year or two. Again, that's what leadership is all about. Let me give you another example. In 2008, oil prices are going to $147 a barrel. We did not really have very much jawboning from the G7 leaders saying that this was not acceptable. As oil prices were at 80, going to $147, OPEC was announcing that they were cutting production because they wanted prices to be even higher. We needed G7 leaders to be screaming together in unison, this is not acceptable, this is going to lead to a major economic problem. Obviously it did, but we didn't get the timing right. If at the end of the day, this focus on core macroeconomic policies, if this could add just 1/10 or 0.2% to world GDP growth a year, we would do much more for fighting global poverty and many of these other agendas than we could achieve by any communique. Now let me just end with a optimistic note, because I believe the US economy is going to quickly be in a recovery phase. I think that we'll be hitting bottom in August, September, October of this year, and I think that the world economy is going to come back. I see healthy growth again. I think the US will have a very good year in 2010. I think financial markets will have a comeback. I moved my family to Japan in December 1989, at the time when the Nikkei was hitting 39,700. You know, today it's still about a quarter of where it was. I do not see that problem in the financial markets today. I think that the Dow will be testing its highs again within the next 2 or 3 years. There's no Deutsche Ex Machina here. We have to do these solutions ourselves. I think the key will be better international cooperation and more tough love from our colleagues. Thank you very much.